Hi, friends. I'm your old pal, Papa Dale, here once again. I'm a retired pastor, teacher, theologian, and professor with over 50 years of service to the Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Dale Warren. Professionally, I'm known in my writing and teaching as D.A. Warren, but my friends just call me Papa Dale, and you can call me Papa Dale. You can see the details of my testimony, family, education, and ministry experience on other videos on this playlist. But for now, let's get right into today's topic, which is poetry, the biblical literature genre known as poetry. Now, this is lecture number 13 of the JHI, the Jan Hus Institute of Biblical Training, and this is the Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Literature series. And so let's get into it now. Biblical poetry. The use of poetry in biblical literature is both profound and pervasive, offering a unique mode of expression that communicates deep theological truths, human emotions, and divine revelations. Poetry in the Bible serves multiple purposes, from glorifying God to lamenting human suffering, and from celebrating creation to prophesying future events. Books like Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Lamentations are largely poetic in structure, characterized by characterized by parallelism, metaphor, and vivid imagery. For instance, the Psalms use lyrical poetry to express the full range of human emotion, joy, despair, hope, and sorrow, while also providing a model for worship and prayer. The metaphors found in these poetic texts, such as God as a shepherd in Psalm 23 or a fortress in Psalm 18, convey complex theological ideas in a relatable and impactful way. Ancient Hebrew poetry found in the Old Testament is rich in various poetic constructions. Now here are 10 key poetic constructs. Parallelism, the most distinctive feature of Hebrew poetry, where lines correspond to each other in meaning, structure, or rhythm. Types include synonymous, antithetical, and synthetic parallelism. Another key construct, chiasmus, or chiasms, a literary structure where elements are presented in a particular order and then repeated in reverse order, like ABBA. Acrostic poems, poems where the first letter of each line or stanza follows the order of the Hebrew alphabet, like in Psalm 119. Another key construct in poetry literature, meter. Although not as prominent as in other poetic traditions, there is a rhythmic quality in Hebrew poetry, often seen in the balance of syllables or stress patterns. Another key element, inclusio. Now this is a literary device where a passage is framed by similar or identical phrases, words, or themes at both the beginning and the end. And then we have repetition, the intentional repetition of words, phrases, or themes for emphasis or effect. The one that comes to mind is where the angels are crying out before God, holy, holy, holy. You know, that's the only attribute of God ever in the Bible to be repeated 3 times in a row like that. Never does it say God is love, 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 although he is love, or justice, 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 although he is just, but it's the only one. God is holy, holy, holy. Wow, that's an amazing thing to me. Imagery, vivid and symbolic language used to convey deeper meanings or evoke strong visual impressions. Then there's metaphor and simile, comparison of one thing to another to illustrate a point or create a vivid picture, often using terms like or as, without which such connectors, well, let's see here, where am I? Now, often the difference between metaphor and simile is using the words like or as, that's a simile, or without such connectors, that's a metaphor. Stickometry, the arrangement of poetry in sticks or verses, with each line having a balanced length and structure. Hyperbole, the use of exaggerated language to make a strong point or to emphasize the greatness or severity of something. These constructs are fundamental to understanding the structure and beauty of ancient Hebrew poetry. Now, in the New Testament, we can find poetic constructs as well, such as Hellenistic Greek poetry, which flourished from the 3rd to the 1st centuries BC. It is known for its refined and sophisticated style. Here are 10 constructs from Hellenistic Greek poetry. The epigram, that's a short, witty poem often inscribed on monuments or used as literary expressions, focusing on a single idea or theme. Another key construct is the pilion, a little epic, epilion. Shorter than traditional epic poems, these often deal with mythological themes and emphasize narrative and descriptive detail. Elegiac couplets, a poetic form used for elegy, consisting of alternating lines of didactical, hexameter, and pentameter. Allusion, frequent references to early Greek literature, mythology, and history, used to create deeper meaning and connections. Ekphrasis, vivid, often elaborate description of art, objects, scenes, blending visual and poetic imagery. Learnedness, like polymathy, the use of erudition and references to obscure myths, historical events, and literary works, showcasing the poet's knowledge and intellect. Narrative interpolation, this is insertion of short, often digressive stories or episodes within a larger narrative, adding layers of meaning or contrast. Concision is a preference for brevity and economy of expression, distilling complex ideas into compact and powerful phrases. Irony and wit. Now, this is subtle, often playful use of language involving double meanings, puns, and clever twists to engage the reader. One of my favorite poetic key phrases or ideas. Pastoral themes. The idealization of rural life and nature is often depicted through the lives of shepherds and the simplicity of the countryside. Now, these constructs illustrate the sophistication, creativity, and literary innovation characteristic of Hellenistic Greek poetry. Moreover, poetry in the Bible often emphasizes the emotional and spiritual dimensions of human experience. The use of parallelism, a hallmark of Hebrew poetry, enables the repetition of key ideas, reinforcing their significance and making them memorable. Prophetic books like Isaiah and Jeremiah also employ poetry to deliver God's messages with an intensity and beauty that prose might not quite achieve. Ultimately, biblical poetry depends on our understanding of God's nature and His relationship with humanity. Through its evocative language and rhythm, it invites readers not just to understand intellectually, but to engage emotionally and spiritually with sacred text, making it an integral part of biblical literature. Now, here are 5 examples of major genres of biblical poetry. Lament. Lamentations and many psalms, like Psalm 22, are examples of this genre. They express sorrow, grief, and a plea for God's intervention, often in response to personal or communal suffering. Major genres of poetry, hymns of praise. These are found throughout the Psalms. For example, Psalm 100 and other books, celebrating God's greatness, power, mercy. These are songs of worship and adoration directed towards God. Another major genre of poetry includes wisdom poetry, found primarily in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and some Psalms, like Psalm 1. This genre of practical guidance for living a righteous and moral life, often through short and memorable sayings or reflections on the human condition. And another genre would be prophetic poetry. Books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Amos contain prophetic poetry, which includes oracles and visions delivered in poetic form. These often convey God's judgment, promises, or future restoration with vivid imagery and symbolic language. These are often places where the prophet will say, "Thus saith the Lord," or "The Lord has spoken." That's an oracle. Then we have love poetry. The Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, is a prime example of this genre. It's a collection of lyrical poems that celebrate romantic love and the beauty of human relationships, often interpreted as an allegory of God's love for his people. We will unpack these more fully in a later lecture. Lamentation literature. Lamentation literature in the Bible primarily refers to the expression of grief, sorrow, mourning, particularly in the context of collective suffering or national calamity. This genre of literature conveys the deep anguish of individuals or communities in response to disasters, loss, or divine judgment. The most prominent example of lamentation literature in the Bible is the book of Lamentations, but the theme of lament is also present in other parts of the scripture. Well, let's look at the book of Lamentations a little bit. Lamentations is a collection of poetic laments traditionally attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, following the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586 BC. The book is structured as an acrostic poem, with each chapter, except the middle one, containing 22 verses corresponding to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This structure represents and reflects a meticulous and orderly expression of grief. What are key themes in Lamentations? Grief and mourning. Lamentations vividly expresses the profound grief of the people of Jerusalem. The poems reflect the emotional and physical devastation experienced by the city and its inhabitants after the fall. Another key theme, the reality of suffering. The book acknowledges the harsh realities of suffering and the consequences of sin. It does not shy away from the intensity of the pain and loss, offering a raw portrayal of human suffering in the face of divine judgment. Another key theme, divine judgment and sovereignty. Lamentations recognizes that the suffering is a result of God's judgment against the sins of the people. It reflects a belief in God's sovereignty and the idea that the suffering is part of divine discipline or punishment. Another key theme: hope and faith in God. Despite overwhelming sorrow, Lamentations also contains expressions of hope and faith. Chapter 3 in particular introduces a shift from despair to hope, emphasizing God's steadfast love, compassion, and faithfulness. This chapter famously includes the declaration, "Great is your faithfulness," Lamentations 3:23. Then we talk about theological reflections. This book invites theological reflection on the nature of suffering, the justice of God, and the hope of restoration. It acknowledges that while God's judgment is real, His love and mercy offer a path to future restoration. Other instances of lamentation outside of the book of Lamentations include the Psalms. Many Psalms are laments that express personal and communal growth. These Psalms often include pleas for help, confessions of distress, and expressions of trust in God. Examples would include Psalm 42, Psalm 77, and Psalm 130. They follow a pattern of addressing God, expressing complaint or sorrow, and ending with a note of hope or trust. In the prophetic books, you have Lamentations. Prophets such as Jeremiah and Ezekiel include lamentations within their messages. Jeremiah's confession, Jeremiah 11, 18 through 23, and 12, 1 through 4, and 15, 10 through 21, and Ezekiel's lament over Tyre, Ezekiel 27, are examples of prophetic lamentations that address the destruction of nations and the suffering of the people. In the book of Job is another significant text of lamentation literature. Job's dialogues with his friends and his own expressions of despair provide a profound exploration of suffering, divine justice, and the search for meaning amidst pain. The lament of the prophets. The prophets often express lament over the sins and consequences faced by Israel and Judah. Their laments convey a deep sense of grief over the spiritual and moral decline of the people and the resulting divine judgment. What are the functions and purpose of these laments? Well, expression of sorrow is one. Lamentations provide a structured way for individuals or communities to express deep sorrow and grief. This form of literature allows for the articulation of pain in a way that acknowledges its reality and intensity. Theological reflection of Lamentations. Lamentation literature encourages reflection on the nature of suffering, the reasons behind it, and the character of God. It grapples with questions of justice, divine judgment, and the possibility of restoration. Encouragement and hope. Even within expressions of deep sorrow, lamentation literature often includes elements of hope and faith. It reassures readers of God's ongoing presence, love, and promise of eventual restoration. Community and individual identity. By documenting collective suffering and expressing communal grief, lamentation literature reinforces the identity of the community and its relationship with God. It helps individuals and communities process their experiences and maintain their faith. In conclusion, Lamentations literature in the Bible provides a powerful and honest portrayal of grief and suffering, offering a theological framework for understanding these experiences within the context of faith. It balances the raw expression of pain with a sense of hope and trust in God's justice and mercy. Whether through the book of Lamentations, the Psalms, or the prophetic writings, this genre of literature remains a vital part of the biblical narrative, reflecting the depth of human emotion and the enduring faith in divine redemption. This has been Papa Dale in the year 2024. If you have prayer requests, comments, or questions, you can leave them in the comments section below. And until the next video, your old pal Papa Dale signing off and saying, I'll be praying for you that you will be well and that you will be blessed.